Hello and welcome to Quick Tip 82. In this quick tip, what I'm going to do is use the same technique that I used in tutorial 188, and that is a way of selecting bars using a rectangle drawing tool. If you've seen tutorial 188, and if you haven't, go to markplex.com. You select a drawing tool, the rectangle drawing tool. You then draw surrounding several bars, or at least in the same horizontal plane as several bars. It doesn't need to actually surround them. Those bars will then be selected. And what I've done is, in this particular instance, I've got the program showing us the high and the low of those bars selected. But what I figured is that it's a technique that perhaps you could use in a program that you're developing. So what I'm going to do is just go through program and try and explain a little bit how it's developed. I think this is considerably more simple than tutorial 188, but at the same time perhaps a little more involved than a lot of the usual quick tips. So in terms of inputs, we've just got one input, and that is the plot color. That is the color of the bars that we select, or the color that we make the bars we select. The color that you can choose is based on the color object color class, and I put the available colors below there. You can also, of course, get it in the help files. So let's just leave the variables and the namespaces alone for the moment, and let's go through the program. The first one we're going to look at is the once statement, and the once statement is where we set up the charting host, and we also do this thing to find out how many decimal places we're going to be using, and that is in this thing here. We also clear all the drawing objects on the chart when this program is first applied or when it's refreshed. We convert the plot color, which is color object from the color class, into an integer because we're going to use that in the plot paint bar, and this is where we do that. And then we clear the print log. Incidentally, we use the number of decimal places, if we just go back to these charts, in this area here. So you can see that we have a 2 decimal place there. If we were to draw on this chart, which is a chart of GBP USD, you'll see that we've got a larger number of decimal places. The other thing we do at the bottom of the program is we want to know when the first tick occurs of each bar, and we do that using this little technique here. So I store the bar status 1 into bstat. So that means at the end of the bar, that is sets bstat to be equal to 2, and then by the time bstat is re-updated, that is effectively the first tick of the next bar. So we say bstat equals 2, then so we store in the dictionary the bar date time as a string, as the index, and the bar number as the value. And before we do that, we just check that the bar, the dict items for the particular date time as a string is null. So we can then add the new value. And the reason we do that is because we need a way of being able to convert between date time and bar number, and we'll be using that later. Okay, so we can now go up. With the charting host, you'll notice that we set up this update, or rather this chart element click event, and that is done here. Incidentally, if you were to want to create this yourself from scratch, and you might not remember this syntax, as indeed I don't, is what you would probably do is go to the toolbox, click on the charting host, then go to the charting host, look at the various events, double click here on the chart element click, double click on that. And then if you go to the designer generated code, then you can see the code that you're going to need to include in your program, together with some additional code that the program has added automatically to your program. For example, here. And we're using similar syntax in ours, except what we've done is taken out the names of the namespaces because we've got those included up here, and we're also using a different name. So what I'm going to do is just remove that, because we're not going to be using that, and I'm just going to get rid of this from the component tray. Let's just check that that's okay. Okay, good. So we look for the event when the chart is clicked, and we need to check that the reason that it's being clicked is because it's a drawing object, and that drawing object is a rectangle, and we do that in this section here. Then I've included some print statements in the program. They're not necessary for the working of the program, but they'll help you to see some of the information. For example, here we're including the rectangle starting point as a string, the bar date time as a string. And if you go to the program and let's just redo drawing rectangle, you'll see that we're getting some information here about the element selected, the date time and the price, date time price, and the bar date time. So the first thing we do, we know the date time of the start bar, we know the date time of the end bar, in other words the rectangles that we've just drawn, the values from those rectangles, rect.startPoint and rect.endPoint as dt point. So what we do is we take that and we get the rectangle start point as type dt point, and we find out what is the date time of that start point, and we convert it to a string, and then by putting that into the dict.items we can find out what the bar number is, the equivalent bar number is. We're storing the bar number for the start into start bar and the bar number for the end into end bar. With that information, the start bar and the end bar, what we can do is paint the bars. So that is what we need to do here, and we're using plot paint bar. We're counting back from the current bar minus end bar to the current bar minus start bar, and what we're also doing while we're going through this loop is finding out what the high of the bars that we've selected and the low of the bars that we've selected. So if the high of the particular bar is greater than the high so far, then that becomes the high, and the low is lower, then that becomes the low. Now the other thing that we do in this program, and just did this as an example, but you see we've got the value of the high and the value of the low drawn here. That is done in this section where we're using text labels, just using the standard syntax. So if you were to right click on that, say definition, you'll see the sort of syntax that you need to create the text labels. So we're using the bn point create, we're using the value of the high selection, the value of the low selection, and then we've just hard coded the font. We're using the same color as the color that's in our input. We're making it persist, then we're adding it to the chart. They are the horizontal style. There's also an equivalent syntax for vertical style. And then finally we delete our rectangle, so the rectangle doesn't stay on the chart once we've got our bars selected. So I just wanted to mention a couple of other things. Now firstly, the selection, as I mentioned in passing, is the rectangle, and if we wanted to select, for example, these bars here, we just need to be in the same horizontal plane. We don't need to actually surround those bars. Then a couple of things in terms of setup. If we go to Studies, Edit Studies, double click on the study and General, we need to make sure that the update value intrabar is ticked, and then what I've done is set the maximum number of bars study will reference to 500. That means that if you want to select bars, those bars have to be within 500 bars of the end of the chart. Of course you could modify that value, but you would also need to add more bars to the chart. Anyway, hopefully that might be useful for you. You might be able to build it into your own programming techniques. I'm going to make this quick tip code free to Gold Pass members. If you're interested in Easy Language, TradeStation Easy Language, then please go to markplex.com and join the email list, and then please also, of course, subscribe to wherever you're watching this video. Thank you very much.